I still remember the time Dylan threw my game console from the second floor, smashing it to pieces, just like the feeling of betrayal that had been carved into my chest since childhood. I was only 8, and he had just turned 6, but somehow he already knew how to manipulate an entire family with a few fake tears. We grew up in a 2-story house in the suburbs of Asheville, North Carolina. We weren't poor, but things were never fair. I was always the one folding laundry, washing dishes, vacuuming. Dylan, my one and only younger brother, only had to sit in front of the TV eating popcorn to make mom laugh, like nothing else mattered. She'd say, "He's fragile, sensitive." But who was it that kept getting hurt year after year? Dylan wasn't just spoiled, he was enabled. He loved pushing my buttons. One day, I found all my carefully sharpened pencils for a test cut into useless stubs, lined up neatly on my desk. Another time, the lunch I packed had soy sauce poured into the center of my sandwich. The worst was one morning when I almost cracked a tooth because he'd snuck pebbles into my cereal. I told Mom, and all I got was a shrug and her saying, "That's just how brothers tease each other." I yelled, "Can't you see he's hurting me?" She set her coffee cup down, didn't even look at me, and said flatly, "You take things too seriously. Dylan's just playing." I was 11 then, the year I finally understood what injustice felt like. Dylan knew he was protected, and he milked it without shame. Once, he even cut my hair while I was asleep. I screamed when I saw the jagged mess in the mirror, and Mom just giggled, told me to lighten up. But if Dylan so much as sniffled, she'd run to him, hand to forehead, as if the sky was falling. My dad was rarely home. He worked construction jobs out of state and only came back every few weeks. When he did, he'd hug me briefly, ask a couple of polite questions, but never saw what was brewing behind the walls. Dylan was a master performer. He'd flash that grin, cling to Dad's arm like the golden child. Meanwhile, I just stood there, watching the familiar play unfold. I never once felt like I was the chosen one in that house. At school, I was the quiet kid with glasses who buried himself in books. Dylan was the opposite, loud, charismatic, always the center of attention. When some classmates bullied me for being too shy, I hoped Dylan might step in. Instead, he joined them. He laughed with the others, called me four-mind freak and loser. I searched his face for guilt. All I saw was delight. One time, I gently pushed him in frustration. He fell over dramatically, wailing as if I'd broken something. Mom stormed in, screaming louder than he did. "What did you do to your brother?" She didn't want explanations. Someone cried, someone stayed silent. She always knew who to defend. I slowly learned to stay quiet. Not because I was weak, but because I knew my words wouldn't change anything. Deep inside, I made myself a promise. The day I grew strong enough, Dylan would never touch my life again. Not ever. I can't recall the exact date, but the smell of burned hair is still vivid. Dylan had snuck into my room while I was nodding off over my homework and lit a fire near the end of my hair. I woke to a crackling noise, slapped out the flame with my bare hand, my skin stinging. Dylan stood behind me, laughing like it was the best joke ever. I bolted from the room, shaken and furious. Mom peeked around the hallway and asked, "What's going on, Caleb?" When I pointed at my scorched hair, she shook her head. "Don't make it a big deal. Dylan didn't mean to." I stood frozen on the stairs, the smell of singed hair on my fingers, feeling like something inside me was being strangled. A few days later, Dad came home early. I was washing dishes when he walked into the kitchen and asked quietly, "Who burned your hair?" I froze. I hadn't planned to tell, but his tone made evasion impossible. I told him not to tattle, but because I couldn't carry the weight anymore. He stayed silent for a while, then told me to grab my shoes. No one knew he took me to a martial arts gym on the north side of Charlotte that day. The place smelled of sweat, aged wood floors, and the echo of gloves hitting pads like angry heartbeats. He signed me up for a 6-month MMA program. "Not so you can hurt anyone," he said, "but so no one dares hurt you." The instructor was a former Marine from Mexico, tough but patient. I started training with a scrawny frame and oversized glasses, mocked by the other kids. I didn't care. I needed something to make me feel less invisible. I learned to move, to react, to stay grounded. Each punch into the bag chipped away at my buried rage. I trained after school, went to bed every night with my pillow still faintly carrying the scent of burned hair, a reminder of why I started. 3 months in, Dylan pulled another stunt. He snuck into my room and stole all the money I'd saved from mowing neighbors' lawns. Enough to buy myself a BMX bike I'd dreamed of. I caught him just as he was about to ride off with his buddies. I stepped in front of the bike. "Give it back, Dylan." He smirked. "What, gonna run to daddy again?" I said nothing. My fists had learned their purpose. One uppercut stunned him. He hit the pavement hard. I reached into his pocket, retrieved my cash, and stood up. "It's not that I was too weak to fight back," I told him. "I just thought you were still my brother." Dylan lay there, speechless. His friends froze, unsure of what to do. Mom burst out, saw Dylan clutching his face, and shouted at me like I was the criminal. Dragged me inside, scolding like I'd crossed some sacred line. Dad had just pulled in. Neighbors had seen everything and told him the truth. When Mom said she wanted to call the police because Caleb attacked his brother, Dad's voice sliced through the air. "If Dylan hadn't stolen money, there wouldn't have been a punch. Who exactly are you defending? A messed up boy? Or the years of excuses we've given him?" The living room air turned to stone. Dylan sat trembling on the couch, face bruised, and Mom fell silent for once. That night, Dad placed a hand on my shoulder. "I was wrong to stay quiet this long. From now on, no one in this house gets to disrespect you again." I nodded, quietly, because deep down, I knew the line had finally been drawn. Dylan could no longer cross into my world. Not because I'd grown stronger, but because I'd stopped being afraid. I left the Asheville house on a mild August morning. The sky was soft. The air wasn't hot, but I burned inside. After years of swallowing resentment and tears, my scuffed plastic suitcase finally made it into the trunk. Not for vacation, but a one-way escape. I got accepted into the finance program at Wake Forest University, the same school Mom once said was too far-fetched. My dorm room was on the 3rd floor. No air conditioning, but I slept better than in any of the 18 years under the same roof as Dylan. No locked drawers. No waking up to laughter behind doors. Each morning, I made coffee with a cheap machine and told myself, from here on out, I get to choose. College life wasn't easy. Tuition, textbooks, meals. Every dollar had to be stretched. I worked in the library, picked up weekend shifts at the nearby cafe, but I never once felt drained, because I was finally living for myself, no longer a shadow in my own home. Karen entered my life while I was waiting in line for a sandwich at the dining hall. She turned, squinted at me, and said, "You've been standing behind me for 10 minutes and haven't even asked for my number?" I turned red. She laughed, eyes twinkling like embarrassment didn't exist in her world. We started dating right after. She majored in psychology, grew up in Wilmington, had soft curls and a calm voice that carried strength. She talked a lot, laughed loud, and couldn't have been more different from me. That's probably why I got pulled in. Study nights turned into hand-holding walks around the lake, then shared breakfasts in our off-campus apartment once we moved out of the dorms. Junior year, Karen told me her cycle was late. 2 weeks later, a pregnancy test showed 2 lines. I remember the feeling, not fear, but shock. Karen curled up on the couch, eyes glassy. I paced the room, mind blank. "You don't have to stay if you're not ready," she whispered. I sat beside her, took her hand, and simply said, "We're doing this together." We shared the news with both families a few weeks later. Karen's mother cried. Her father said nothing. On my side, Dad gave a nod over the phone and told me, "Just be responsible." Mom never picked up. Dylan was attending community college in town back then, but he didn't say a word. We had a small ceremony in the backyard of Karen's parents' house. Around 20 close people attended. I wore a dark blue suit, and Karen wore a simple white dress that somehow looked unreal. When the pastor read the words, "In sickness and in health," she squeezed my hand tighter. I remember that perfectly. After the wedding, we moved to Greensboro, where I'd landed a paid internship at an auditing firm. Karen paused her studies to take care of the pregnancy, while I worked long hours building everything from the ground up. Not to be a hero, but because I never had anyone truly stand by me, and I didn't want my first child to grow up feeling that same kind of alone. There were nights Karen got up nauseated, and I used that time to study for industry certifications. Quick meals on the couch, rainy day ultrasound appointments, soft kicks inside her belly. Each moment hit deep, real, and priceless. I never thought I'd have a real family. But back then, I believed I was building one, piece by piece. I didn't expect that the very place I trusted to be my safest would bury knives the deepest. But all of that was still ahead. At that point, I had no idea. I only knew I was living each minute fully. And sometimes, those are the cruelest minutes of all. Someone once told me that marriage means choosing one person to forgive more than anyone else in your lifetime. I laughed when I heard that, thought it was just a bitter joke from some heartbroken guy. Now, it's not funny at all. Less than 2 years after the wedding, Karen got involved with someone at work, a married man nearly 10 years older, in her HR department. I didn't find out from her. I heard it from one of my coworkers who saw them at a Mexican restaurant off Windover Avenue, holding hands, laughing, as if the world around them didn't exist. I didn't believe it, not because Karen wasn't capable of it, but because I didn't want to believe the life I'd built from nothing could unravel so easily. I came home and said nothing. She was watching TV, wrapped in a towel after washing her hair. The scent of conditioner still lingered in the air. "What should we eat tonight?" she asked casually. I sat across from her, placed my phone on the table. The screen showed a blurry photo, but clear enough to crush my chest. Karen looked at it, blinked once, twice, then sighed. No denial, no excuses. It was just a few times. "It wasn't serious," she said, gripping the edge of her chair. I walked out to the balcony, lit a cigarette I'd stashed in the drawer months ago. My mind went blank. When I came back inside, I asked her just one thing. "Do you still want to stay?" She nodded, barely, like she had hoped I'd scream, slam doors, walk out, just so she wouldn't have to be the one to decide. We didn't talk about it again for weeks, just lived. Like two people balancing on a frozen pond. I slept less, checked her messages more, learned to read her face like a language. Trust, once cracked, never heals perfectly, but for the sake of our son, I swallowed it. His name was Aiden. Every time I saw him asleep, tiny hands folded like he was praying. I thought if I left Karen, I'd lose him too. I couldn't bear that. Time passed. Some nights Karen came home late with excuses like monthly reports or end-of-quarter meetings. I didn't question her. I was scared the next answer would destroy me further. One fall, 4 years into the marriage, Karen said she wanted to visit her family in Georgia. A 3-day trip. I agreed, dropped her at the bus station, gave her a light hug, and went home. For 3 days, it was just me and Aiden. We ate cold sandwiches, built a blanket fort in the living room, watched cartoons until midnight. I thought things were okay. But her ex from high school lived in Georgia, the one her parents once disapproved of for being going nowhere. He was still around, still texting. I found the messages while Karen was asleep. No code names, no hidden folders. "Do you remember the last time we were together?" The message flashed across the screen like a blade. There were no photos, no videos, but I could fill in the blanks. Karen woke up in the middle of the night and saw me sitting at the kitchen table with her phone lit. She stood still for a moment, then walked into the bathroom without saying anything. When she came out, I asked directly, "Anything you haven't told me?" She lowered her head. "I made a mistake, but that's in the past." I stared at her. The question in my head wasn't, "How could you?" It was, "Why?" But I didn't ask any more. I had forgiven her once. Why not again? Not because I was weak, not because I loved her too much, but because I was afraid of losing Aiden, afraid of him standing between two adults who no longer smiled at each other. So I stayed. No more tears, just a kind of endurance folded into my back like a damp, heavy winter blanket you keep dragging around. Some said I was crazy, others called it brave. I didn't know which one I was. I just tried to believe, to hold on, to live as if this family was still worth saving, even when the trust inside me had already started to rust. Karen stood in front of me, her lips cracked like she'd swallowed ice. Her eyes dropped to the kitchen floor, where I had just set down 2 plates of creamy pasta for dinner. Aiden sat in the living room, eyes glued to the cartoon, music masking the tension thickening in the air. "What's going on?" I asked, still drying the last dish even though it was already bone dry. Karen swallowed hard, then let it out like a blade. "Caleb, I slept with Dylan." I froze. No reaction, no words, just his name, Dylan, echoing in my head like a roar. The same brother who ruined my childhood was now stepping straight into the part of my life I had bled to build. A man who never knew when to stop. I set the towel down, pulled out a chair, and sat as if my legs could no longer support my weight. How long? My voice barely sounded like mine. Back in Asheville. That holiday break? When I stayed a few days after Christmas, she said, choking up. It wasn't planned, just a stupid moment. But then I found out I was pregnant, and I didn't know what to think. My fists clenched, heat flooding my face. Karen went on, each word digging deeper into the calm I had fought to protect. I couldn't be sure whose child it was, but I chose you because I knew you were dependable, loving, solid. Dylan had nothing but charm and a smooth tongue. "You kept seeing him?" I asked, still not looking at her. A pause stretched too long. Then, quietly, a few times after that, whenever I said I was traveling for work, I was meeting him. The room spun. Aiden called out from the living room asking when dinner was ready. I mumbled something useless in return. Karen reached for my hand. I stepped back. "Why Dylan?" I asked almost involuntarily. Not because I didn't already suspect, but because I still couldn't believe she'd actually say it out loud. Bot said, "Understood me." "In some strange way," Karen whispered. "Sometimes I felt like you were distant, hard, but Dylan always made me feel wanted." I let out a dry laugh. It echoed through the kitchen like broken glass. "You talk like I'm a stranger in this house." She didn't answer. I stood up, walked into the room, pulled my duffel bag from under the bed, and began packing. Karen rushed after me, her voice frantic. "Caleb, you're really leaving now? Aiden is here. He needs his father." I stopped folding. Aiden might not be mine. That sentence brought her to her knees. She collapsed to the floor, sobbing into her hands. I didn't turn back. My hands kept folding clothes like I was sealing away a life that used to feel real, used to feel safe. She screamed, "You can't do this. You're the only father he's ever known." I zipped the bag, paused for a moment. My throat clenched, but no words came out. I had sacrificed everything for a family that might never have been mine. I walked toward the door. Karen ran after me. "Please, I was wrong. I know I was wrong. But it can't end like this. We can still fix it." I opened the door and turned back one last time. "You can fix it with Dylan because from this moment on, I'm not your husband. I'm not even his brother." Karen stood frozen, tears streaming, but what stayed with me wasn't her face. It was Aiden's eyes, wide and confused as he watched me drag my suitcase to the door. That look tore me in half. I drove to a cheap motel on the edge of the city. Checked in without a word. A faded painting hung crooked above the bed. A flickering desk lamp cast a dull yellow glow. I sat on the mattress, phone in hand, thumb resting on my dad's name in the contact list. But I couldn't bring myself to call. This story wasn't over. Dylan was still out there, living freely with a secret I'd let fester for too long. But things had changed now. I returned to Asheville on a damp afternoon just after the rain stopped. My parents' house sat still on the old hill, its gray shingles streaked with water, the white fence now yellowed with age. I parked in the driveway and looked through the living room window, its golden light glowing like nothing had ever happened. Mom opened the door. She hugged me tight. "You've lost weight, Caleb. Come in, I made stew." I stood still for a moment, then stepped inside without saying a word. Dad was reading the paper at the dining table. He looked up when he saw me, nodded, folded the paper, and set it aside. I sat down without waiting to be invited. Mom laid out bowls and began ladling soup. I kept staring at the empty seat across from me, the one Dylan used to fill, laughing as he spun false stories, playing the perfect little brother I could never quite become. I took a sip of water. Karen and I separated, I said flatly. Mom froze, spoon suspended midair. What happened, son? No marriage is perfect. I looked her dead in the eye. No more hiding. Karen had an affair with Dylan for years, and Aiden might not be my son. The silence was instant. Mom placed the bowl down abruptly, broth spilling over the edge. Caleb, what are you saying? Dylan would never. I pulled out my phone and played the recording of my conversation with Karen the night before. Her voice was clear, each word sliced through the half-eaten meal like a knife. Mom clapped her hand over her mouth. Dad said nothing, his fingers tightening on the table's edge. I just wanted you both to know the truth. All of it, I said. No, Dylan couldn't have done this to you, Mom whispered. But her eyes had started to crack. I turned to Dad. I need you both to hear it from him. Don't defend him just because he's the youngest. Dad motioned for me to make the call. I dialed Dylan, put it on speaker. The line rang a few times before he answered. What's up, Caleb? You and Karen, got anything to say? Dylan paused, then let out a laugh. What are you talking about? Still bitter that your sweet little wife picked me? I didn't answer. Mom grabbed my sleeve, trembling. Dad sat upright, eyes fixed ahead. You think you're better than me. Always playing the perfect son, but your wife still chose my bed. Again and again. You're just the runner-up. Dylan's voice dripped with arrogance. I hung up. There was nothing more to hear. Mom collapsed into her chair, eyes filled with disbelief. No, it can't be. Dad stood, walked upstairs, and returned with a thick folder. He placed it on the table and looked at me. You know I've had my will in place since I retired, right? I nodded. I'm changing it tomorrow. He turned to Mom, his tone icy. Dylan gets nothing. No tuition, no car, no support. Mom opened her mouth to object, but he raised a hand. If you defend him again, pack your bags and go live with him. I looked at them, two people who had once blindly shielded Dylan, now sitting in the kitchen, drained of all illusions. I felt no triumph, just a quiet, cold void. Dad pulled out a sheet and signed it. Everything. Nearly $2 million in the house, land, retirement fund, life insurance. Goes to you, Caleb. If I die first, your mom keeps living here, but you own it. I didn't answer immediately. After a long pause, I said, I don't need all that money. I just need this family to stop pretending. He looked at me, not like a father, but like one man to another. Then you'll have it. No one crosses you again without consequence. I stood, walked out, as the rain picked up outside. The wind pushed against the windows like a quiet warning. Everything had shifted. There was no going back. No more room for lies in that house. Dylan and Karen moved into a rundown apartment behind a gas station near Interstate 26, far from the nice neighborhoods they once dreamed of. Ground floor unit, mold-stained walls, a broken window they had to board up with plywood. Dylan used to brag about his handyman skills, but now had no choice but to use them for real. His community college enrollment was suspended as soon as my parents cut off his funding. He tried applying for scholarships, but with average grades and a scandal on his record, no school would take him. He ended up working part-time at a small garage in the city's south side, changing oil, banging on exhausts, earning barely enough to cover diapers and formula for Aiden. Karen, who once strutted in heels and posted latte art to Instagram every morning, now ran a small online shop out of their dim kitchen. The lighting wasn't good enough for decent photos. She quit social media after receiving a flood of messages from my friends and former friends of hers. Not cruel messages, just cold, firm, and final. Don't ever contact us again. As for the rest of the family, the ones who once called Dylan brilliant and Karen wife material, vanished. At the next Christmas gathering at my uncle's house, same as every year, no one said Dylan's name. Even the holiday card only had my name and my parents. No Karen and Dylan's family. One afternoon, while I was washing my car in the driveway, Karen showed up. Her eyes were tired, her hair tied up sloppily, face gaunt. She stood outside the gate, holding Aiden's hand. He'd grown, but his eyes were still wide like always, now laced with a strange uncertainty. Caleb, her voice trembled. I'm not here to cause trouble. If possible, I'd like you to keep seeing Aiden. I paused, wiped water off my wrist with a towel, and stared at them through the iron fence. You're the only father he's ever known. I know I messed up, but Aiden didn't do anything wrong. I looked at the boy. He looked back in silence, then turned to Karen, gripping her shirt like he sensed something bad was coming. My chest tightened in a way I couldn't quite name. Does he know? I asked, eyes still on the child. Does he know I'm not his biological father? Karen bit her lip, shook her head. I haven't had the courage to tell him. I nodded, bent over the hose spigot. Good. Don't tell him. And don't come back. You're punishing me by walking out of his life, she hissed. I looked up, my voice lowering. I don't want the boy to grow up in a lie. But I also can't stand between two people who betrayed me and pretend everything is fine. I can't hold him without remembering the lies you used to whisper into my ear before sneaking off to see Dylan. Karen froze, tears spilling down. Aiden looked at her, then at me, confused. I don't hate the boy, but I don't want anything in my life that drags me back to where it all began. You know what that means, don't you? Karen stayed silent. She bent down and wrapped her arms around Aiden. Let's go home, baby. The boy glanced back as they walked toward the car. His eyes looked like mine, like they used to be mine, but weren't. I turned back to the car, but my hand couldn't hold the hose. I let it drop to the pavement, the faint thud echoing inside me like something breaking for good. Dylan didn't call, didn't text. Maybe he still thought I'd be as foolish as before, that I'd forgive, that I'd soften because of family. But this time, silence was the loudest answer. No shouting, no punches. He knew the door that had once been open was now locked for good, and the key was no longer his. I signed the lease for a small apartment in West Greensboro just 2 weeks after walking away. It was on the second floor, not very spacious, but it had a tiny balcony overlooking the maples starting to turn red. The landlord was a quiet widower who only asked one thing when I moved in. You living alone? I nodded. No explanation needed. Every morning, I brewed coffee and opened the window to let sunlight pour into the living room. No more footsteps creeping around at night, no more traces of strange perfume on the sheets. I lived in a silence of my own choosing, not one forced upon me. One night, Dad called. He didn't beat around the bush. I just updated the will. Dylan gets $1, the rest, retirement accounts, insurance, stocks, it all goes to you. I leaned back on the couch and muted the TV. I don't need that much. It's not because you need it. It's because he doesn't deserve it. I didn't argue. Silence was agreement enough. 6 days later, Dylan called. I was getting ready for bed when the screen lit up, his name glowing in the dark. I hesitated for a few seconds, then picked up. His voice came through hoarse, desperate. Caleb, you answered, thank God. I said nothing. I'm sorry, I know I messed everything up. Karen left me. Said she couldn't take it anymore. I lost my scholarship, lost my job at the garage. No one will even talk to me now. Can you talk to Mom and Dad for me? Help me get back some of their trust? I gave a dry laugh. You want me to help you earn back trust? After you shattered everything I ever built? I made a mistake. I'm only human, Caleb. Don't we all mess up? I closed my eyes. I'm not saying you're not human. I'm just saying you're not my brother anymore. You're really cutting me off? I'm not turning my back. I'm just done looking your way. Dylan went quiet. Before I ended the call, I left him with one final line. Consequences aren't punishment. They're results. After that call, I never mentioned Dylan again. Never got another call from him either. I threw myself into work. The company upped our hours, but I didn't complain. The deeper I got into reports and data, the more my mind found relief. I started seeing a therapist, initially just to help with sleep, but after a few sessions, I realized I needed more than that. I told her about being emotionally abandoned as a kid, about growing up as the substitute in my own family, about a marriage I thought would be my shelter, but turned out to be the easiest place for someone to stab me. She didn't judge. She asked, if it hadn't been Dylan, could you have forgiven it? I didn't answer right away, then slowly shook my head. It doesn't matter anymore. Forgiveness can be a luxury, one I can't afford. She nodded, then brought me back to the present. Asked, what do you want for the next few years? I went home and wrote down 3 things. 1, to sleep through the night without flinching. 2, to eat dinner without forced silence. 3, to stop remembering the scent of strange perfume on my pillowcase. I taped the note to my fridge, like a personal contract. Mom texted me a few times. Nothing long, just short notes like, getting cold, bundle up. Bundle up. I replied thanks once. Dad was different. He showed up unannounced with a tin of cookies he'd baked himself, the same recipe he once taught me back in high school. I'm trying to fix things, he said, not explaining further. Because I let it all go too long. I didn't blame him. Didn't hug him either, but for the first time we drank coffee together without that awkward silence. Someone once asked if I regretted walking away from Aiden. I simply said, some things you don't let go because you don't love them. You let go because holding on would destroy what's left of you. I don't wish for things to go back. I just want to wake up each morning without feeling like I'm bleeding from inside. And now, at least, I've stepped far enough away. Not too far, but far enough to be real. Caleb's story is a brutal but necessary reminder that sometimes the betrayal doesn't come from outsiders. It comes from the ones closest to us. After all the pain and deceit, he didn't seek revenge. He chose to walk away, preserving what dignity and peace he had left. Caleb isn't trying to forget or to forgive. He's learning how to keep going, defined not by his past, but by the strength he chose for his future. What do you think of Caleb's choice? Should he have forgiven, or was cutting ties the right call? Share your thoughts below. Don't forget to follow the channel for more powerful and emotional stories about family and life.